You've seen his face everywhere, right? On t-shirts, posters, protest signs. It's one of the most famous and, yeah, most debated images of our time. We're talking, of course, about Che Guevara.
But that iconic image, it's just one part of the story. So who was the actual person behind the legend? What's the real story? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack here.
All right, so here's how we'll break it down. We'll start with that iconic face of revolution. Then we'll rewind a bit to see how this radical was forged in the first place. After that, we'll get into the thick of it with the Cuban campaign, his time trying to govern a new nation, and his mission to export the revolution. And finally, we'll tackle that incredibly complicated and contested legacy he left behind. Okay, first up, the face of revolution. And it's no exaggeration. From protest banners all the way to pop culture, that image, it gets people talking. It sparks so much debate. And here's what's so wild about it. That one single image means completely different things to different people. You've got one side that sees it as this powerful symbol of fighting against injustice, and then you have another side that sees it and immediately thinks of armed struggle and violence. It's that huge gap, that deep divide that makes his story so compelling.
So you have to ask, how did he get here? How does a person become this kind of symbol? Let's dig into that. We're moving on to the forging of a radical, his journey from, believe it or not, a medical student to a full-blown revolutionary.
All right, so let's go back to the beginning. Ernesto Guevara, born in Argentina in 1928. And right from the start, he had this major challenge, severe asthma. But it didn't stop him. He was known for being incredibly resilient and just having this burning intellectual curiosity. I mean, he was constantly reading, studying politics and philosophy. And his plan? He enrolled in medical school. The goal was to become a doctor.
But then he took a trip, a big one. And these motorcycle journeys across Latin America just completely upended his life. I mean, think about it. He goes to Chile and sees these absolutely brutal conditions in the mining towns. Then he's in Peru, seeing whole communities with zero access to basic health care. He gets to Colombia and is just face-to-face with staggering inequality and exploitation. Every single place he went, it was like another piece of the puzzle falling into place, totally changing how he saw the world.
And that's the real turning point, right? He starts to connect the dots. He realizes all this suffering he's seeing, it isn't just bad luck. It's not an accident. He becomes convinced it's a symptom of a broken system, an unjust political and economic structure. And for him, that was all tied up in ideas about foreign control and Marxist theory. So, with this new fire in his belly, this new conviction, it leads him straight to our next chapter, the Cuban campaign. This is where he teams up with a guy named Fidel Castro, and everything changes. And let me tell you, their path was not a walk in the park. Not at all. Che meets Castro in Mexico in '55, signs right up for the cause. They pile onto this little yacht, the Grama, and sail for Cuba. But the landing? A total disaster. The few who survive have to flee into the mountains. And it's from there, against all odds, that they build this guerrilla army, slowly gaining support, until finally, they march into Havana in January 1959, victorious.
Okay, so they won. The revolution is a success. But winning the war is one thing. Actually running a country, that's a whole different ballgame. So let's see what happens next. Governing a new nation. This is where Che has to trade his guerrilla uniform for a suit and tie, essentially.
And he wasn't just some figurehead. Guevara jumps into these huge roles. President of the National Bank, Minister of Industry. I mean, big stuff. His vision was pretty straightforward. Cut Cuba's dependence on other countries and kickstart industrialization fast. But, and this is a big but, his huge ambitions slammed right into the hard wall of reality. Global politics, trade embargoes. The result? The Cuban economy really struggled. It's kind of the classic example of how hard it is to make revolutionary dreams work in the real world.
But for Che, Cuba was never meant to be the end of the story. He really believed that this revolution wasn't just for one tiny island. It had to go global. And that brings us to our next part, exporting the struggle. This was his dream of a worldwide revolutionary movement.
So he steps onto the world stage. He's giving these fiery speeches at the United Nations, calling out colonialism. He's traveling all over Africa and Asia, trying to help other revolutionary movements get off the ground. But back in Cuba, things got tense. He had disagreements over strategy and ended up leaving the country in 1965 to practice what he preached. He tried to help insurgents in the Congo, but that mission was a mess. Then he tried again in Bolivia, and that didn't go well either.
And that final campaign in Bolivia, that's where it all came to a very sudden, very brutal end. In October of 1967, Che Guevara was captured by Bolivian forces, and he was executed. He was only 39 years old.
And here's the great irony of his story. His last mission was a total failure. But it's that failure and his death that cemented his status as a global icon. It's a huge paradox, and it leads us right into our final section, the contested legacy. Because in death, Che became bigger than he ever was in life. That portrait, you know the one, it became one of the most famous, most reproduced images of the entire 20th century. Student movements, activists, rebels all over the world, they picked it up and turned it into this ultimate symbol of defiance. And that debate is still raging today, for sure. On one side, you have his supporters who see him as this deeply committed idealist, a hero who stood up to empires. But then you have his critics, and they'll tell you that he championed armed struggle, that he caused economic chaos, and that he wasn't afraid to use violence as a political weapon. When you boil it all down, it comes back to his core belief, which was basically this: meaningful change required decisive action. He had no time for slow, gradual reform. For him, the only way to get real change was through revolution. Period. So, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you see him as a hero, a villain, or something way more complicated. His story, his life, it makes us ask some really tough questions. Questions about justice, about power, and about what it truly costs to be so completely committed to an idea. And honestly, that's a conversation that's just as important today as it was back then.